Hi, everybody. Welcome to How Principals in Play Connect to Gifted Pedagogy. My name is Angela Novak. I am an assistant professor at East Carolina University, coming to the U.S. Play Coalition Online 2020 conference from my COVID quarantine house in Wake Forest, North Carolina.
And I am Sylvan Taylor. I'm the school-wide enrichment teacher at the Downtown School, which is a public magnet right in the heart of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I am coming to you from my home here in social distancing times in Kerrsville, North Carolina, right outside of Winston-Salem. So welcome, and let's begin. So I'm going to start, as I imagine several other sessions you may have attended virtually did start, with asking you to dig up some childhood memories of play. Think about where you were, what you were experiencing and feeling, and just kind of meditate on that for a minute. Pause your presentation while you think. Give yourself some wait time, and then when you come back, I have some questions for you. Okay, so you got yourself in that space in your childhood, in that really vivid memory of play, right? I'm interested in where you were. Were you inside or outside? Who was present with you? Were you alone? Were you with other children? Were you with adults? And was that location at a school or similar type of maybe childcare facility? And take another moment, pause your presentation and think on those questions. I'm willing to bet that most of your memories, the really vivid, good, strong play memories, don't involve adults, are probably outside. And especially if you're younger than me, meaning that your childhood memories are taking place outside of the 1980s or earlier, you weren't in a school setting either. And I want you to hold on to those thoughts as we move forward. And think about why those vivid, meaningful play memories so often happen outside of school or other, for lack of a better word, institutional settings, and how maybe we can begin to rectify that. So most of you are probably familiar with Peter Gray's definition of play. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over that, but I think it's an important foundation, because this is the definition of play that we are working with in our work that we'll be talking about here today. I'll give you a moment to read over this, and you can pause it. You can pause your screen to read this in more detail, but I really want you to focus on the ideas of play being self-chosen and self-directed, and that idea being that players are always free to quit when they choose to. And that the means are more valued than the ends, that you're engaging in activities for the pure joy of doing them or for some other benefit that you're getting out of them, not for someone else to evaluate you. That the structure may not be dictated by others on the outside. And really focus on number 5. We're going to circle back around to that as well. That idea of an active, alert, but non-stressed frame of mind, which is often referred to as flow. If you need a moment, if you want to take a picture of this, make some notes, think on it some more, pause, and then we're going to move on. So, oops, I'm going to go back. These are some images from kids at my school during our Loose Parts Fridays. And while I imagine most of our audience today is familiar with the concept of loose parts, we will be defining that later. But as you'll notice in these images, these are kids ranging in age from kindergarten all the way up through 8th grade. So a little bit older than the typical audience for real, authentic free play that you might see in some other work. Lots of open-ended materials here. You can see all of our Jimmy John's buckets. We have a very generous father who runs a local Jimmy John's. And some kindergartners here who found that if you poured water from the watering cans on the buckets, you could see the sound, you could see the vibrations, and the flow as they engaged in that was really amazing to watch. None of these activities were dictated by adults. They were all child-led. We periodically bring out a lot of cardboard for Cardboard Construction Day. These are 4th graders who are building an elaborate fort and tunnel system. They worked really hard on this for an extended period of time. Um, and again, noticing some of those elements of play that we highlighted at the beginning, everyone was free to engage or not engage as they so chose. You can see sometimes small and sometimes large groups of kids working together. They're playing, they're working, they're engaging with each other, very much in that state of flow by agreement. They've all opted in. This is freely chosen activity. And it's for the sake of the activity, although as you can see, especially with the older kids, there is sometimes some end product that they clearly have in mind that you can see as they're working. I'm going to ask you to pause here in a minute and think about this picture, because so much of what we think about when we talk about play, especially if you talk to people who aren't particularly well versed in it, talking about play in elementary schools, they talk about running around and getting their energy out and having a break from the kinds of focus and concentration that we expect in schools. And sure, that's a part of it. That's what some kids maybe are looking for, but really meaningful play is certainly not aimless, and it's not always boisterous. So pause for a second while you think about what's going on in this picture. And when you resume, we'll talk about it some more. So I hope you paused and thought and have some ideas. This guy is a fifth grader, and he spent his class was outside for about 40 minutes this day, his entire time engaged solo in building this tower. And you can see a lot of the materials here. There's some both intact and broken sand mud kitchen colanders and bowls and baking sheets here. There's a paint roller tray. There's some collapsible buckets. And there's a slightly flat basketball. There's a lot of thought going on here. There's a lot of depth of thinking, the focus and concentration. This is a true state of flow. And he worked on this, it was his own choosing, so it meets all the definitions of play. But it could also meet all of our definitions of work or task commitment. The difference being that it's freely chosen. And I think this is a great picture to meditate on for a minute when we think about all the different ways that play can look when it's chosen by kids, when the materials are open-ended, and when they have a chance to think and engage. And this kind of play is especially meaningful when we talk about wanting kids to develop grits and task commitment and stick-to-itiveness. This guy clearly demonstrates this, and this is what he wanted to spend his free time doing. So I want to talk a little bit about loose parts. I bet most of you have a good understanding of loose parts as it is. But here's sort of the quick and dirty. Loose parts, although we talk about them very often in play-focused circles, were developed by an architect in the early 70s. Simon Nicholson is credited with developing loose parts. And the idea behind them is that they can be used in a variety of ways. They're very open-ended. And therefore can kind of take the place of anything and be used in many different ways, really engaging kids' creativity and empowering them in ways that more closed, prescribed materials can't. And if you want to take a minute with this, just pause and then come back and we'll talk a bit more. So loose parts theory is about remembering that the best play comes from things that allow children to play in many different ways and on many different levels. Environments that include loose parts are infinitely more stimulating and engaging than static ones. And this seems so intuitive and so obvious when stated like this and when you've seen kids playing with truly open-ended materials. But when you look at the environments that we so often give children, especially children in schools, play with or to play on, they're incredibly static, they're incredibly fixed, and we don't offer them much room in terms of choosing how to engage with that play equipment. I mean, I'm sure you all have a picture in your mind right now of fixed playground equipment. Don't go up the slide, don't climb on the top of it. go use the equipment, go play, go run around. And children lose interest with those kinds of materials very, very quickly because they're so closed. And loose parts in an environment ignite so much more thoughts and engagement. Again, it seems so obvious and intuitive, but it's not what we typically give to kids. Why? Well, sometimes loose parts can look junky. It can take a lot of convincing to explain to people in schools why we're giving kids what appear to be junk or things that may at face value appear to have some risk involved with them. Here we have some first graders that were really, really into building what they called laser mazes with bungee cords. So we've got bungees, we have the small bungees that kind of like really large versions of those ponytail holders that we used in the 80s. And then some dryer tubing that make fantastic robot arms and are used pretty often as robot arms. And so these guys built the laser maze. It went all the way through the fixed equipment, changed it significantly enough that the kids found it engaging again, and then were leading their classmates through the laser maze, which you then exited as a robot down the slide. And everyone had a lot of fun with that and spent a great deal of time building and modifying it um, to suit their needs and their plans. Same materials, kindergartners here, bungees, jump ropes, some of the large fabric that we let the kids use for constructing swings. There's those wonderful Jimmy John's buckets again, and some PVC pipes that the kids started using to build forts alongside this webbing here, and then decided it was better used for sort of a walking climbing stick for stability. And I've chosen a series of pictures here that highlight, I think, a wide range of uses for very, very basic materials that are very open-ended. You can see kids of different ages engaging with them, being creative with them, and really sticking with a problem, showing that critical reasoning. These are a side by side. On the left are third graders and on the right are fifth graders using those PVC pipes. Again, you can probably see what they're doing. We've got the kids on the left working on a water system. They worked and worked and worked and worked on that, making systems that water would run through using the PVC pipe and buckets and funnels. And then on the right, same materials, they were working on building the frame for a fort. They were finding it rather challenging because it's hard to build a sturdy frame with PVC pipe, but it ended up ultimately being pretty successful in that. Same materials, different uses, totally up to the kids. We have a side-by-side of some PVC pipe being used, again, for a water transmission system. And if you look at those kids on the right, they've got some potions and concoctions of mud and shave chalk that they're using the water for. I think this may have been a bakery stand on this particular day. Those are first graders. And then on the left are kindergartners building some systems with cardboard tubing and cardboard boxes in a cardboard construction day. Both cases, you can see kids playing with a lot of the laws of physics, a lot of pretty hefty STEM thinking there. I don't love having to justify meaningful play by using educational terms, but it's valuable, as I say, when the wolves come to the door. Think of all the science and all the math and all the critical reasoning that these kids are engaging in these two pictures, and these kindergartners on the left and first graders on the right. And they're going to be so well prepared for upper grade science. In the foreground here, you've got a little guy constructing with the cardboard and masking tape again. In the middle of the frame are girls swinging on some of the kid constructed swings. Older students made the swings and the younger students love using them. And then in the background, you can see that PVC pipe at work again, for a little guy using that to reach for something up high on that fixed equipment, which the kids are using, but using in more innovative ways. And you can see a couple of our parent volunteers out there helping as well. I had parents trained in play work by Linda Kinney at the North Carolina Zoo, who does amazing work, and they come and help out, support the kids play on these loose park days. Now these are fourth graders. There's a PVC pipe again. They're playing hockey. And so they have their own kind of modified version of hockey with one of those partially inflated balls that seem to just spring into being on playgrounds all over the country. And the PVC pipes is their hockey sticks, and that was really engaging for them. More swings being constructed by first graders, and then on the right, first graders engaging in battle. We have a rule that is scrap on scrap, being careful not to harm anybody that you're engaging with, and watching the social emotional development and the care that they take with wanting to continue their battle, again, free to quit at any time, while they fence and defend their bases with their PVC pipe swords. It's really, really cool to watch. Those are all first graders in these images. And I think this is our last frame here with more bungees and PVC pipe and buckets. The same materials recycled over and over and over and over again. Kids of different ages, with different interests, finding ways to engage with them, finding ways to challenge their minds and their bodies. And it's really cool too to watch the way they mix up their social groups. And anybody who's seen kids in a variety of settings knows that, you know, they tend to kind of click up. And our middle school teachers especially have said it's wonderful to see the way that the groupings are a little bit more fluid on loose parts days, because the kids are motivated more by interest than by their typical social groupings. It's really neat to see. So this quote is from Loris Malaguzzi, who you may be familiar with, the founder of the Reggio Emilia approach, which talked about more in early childhood, but is certainly applicable up into the upper grades as well. But he says the wider the range of possibilities we offer children, the more intense will be their motivations and the richer their experiences. And I found that really resonates with me, because that's what we want, right? That's what's meaningful for kids. That's what we want from their education. We want them to have a wide range of possibilities, because they'll be intensely motivated in having rich experiences. That's where the real learning and real growth happens. And a few more images here. These girls had built a restaurant. You can see their table there and seats with the buckets and the cardboard. They were serving up all kinds of dishes, first graders here. And a wide variety, some sixth graders who made a hammock. Third graders experimenting with bubbles, which is available on many of the loose parts days. And some second graders here drumming, which is really cool. And you'll hear some drum beats in the background of some of our videos here in a little bit. Some of the things that are engaging for our students as they get the chance to play. So here are two videos. This is a before and after, and I'm gonna ask that after you view the videos, you take a minute, pause the presentation, and meditate on what kinds of skills and mindsets you notice in these videos that we are hoping for in our students. These are fourth graders. The first little short video was taken at the beginning of their recess period, and the second was taken somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes later. There are swings, some drumming, some experimentation here. They're calling them snowshoes. And all the art you see is actually kid planned and implemented art as well. And you can see here in the background, these guys are beginning some construction projects here at the start of their recess time. And so now here is the same group of students at the end of that same period. Look at how much they've accomplished. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to pause here in a minute to think about what you saw. Think about what aspects of that really speak to, again, mindsets, skill sets that we want kids to have. Maybe also some things that you might feel like you'd have to defend to your administration. So pause, think, and then we'll come back. Okay, so in lieu of actual discussion, which we can't really have, right? Um, what are some things we saw? Definitely a great deal of task commitment. The students were showing task commitment, grit, whatever you want to call it. They took on a project, they engaged in it intentionally and willingly and by choice, and that spanned the entire recess period. They went from kind of tinkering around with the materials to having a full scale, to actually two large sports that several kids could get into, and then they engaged in a playful battle, fort against fort, base against base. Um, some of those things, I'm sure many of you thought, well, it looks a little messy, it looks a little junky. It's hard sometimes to defend those loose parts out there. But when people pause and look and really notice the engagement and the focus, the task commitment, and then that brings me to our next concept here, which is the idea of flow. And again, those of you who have studied play fairly extensively are probably familiar with this concept of flow. The definition that play workers, or that those who study play work usually use, is something along the lines of when a child is absorbed in their play, they're in the play flow, and that can last for minutes, hours, or sometimes days at a time. So what this means is kids can be working on something, go away and come back, go away and come back, and still be engaged in that same project. I've seen beautiful examples of flow over the course of our kindergarten and first grade students actually have multiple recesses throughout the day, which is awesome, and they're fortunate to have that. Many public schools don't. Um, I've seen them start, have to go in, come back to the same project, and even if they have to change what somebody else has done, if another group has dismantled what they were building or changed it in some way that they don't like, they will without complaint get right back to work and change it. During this state, the child is active, alert, engaged, and non-stressed. There is structure even if it's not visible. Sometimes you have to kind of sit and watch for a little bit, wait a tick. It may not look structured, but it is. It's structured by that child at play. And this is a great example of a kindergartner who built a structure here. It involves boxes and some pipes and lots of duct tape. It only really needs the tube, but he has a whole imaginative array of uses here, and he wanted to talk to everyone who came through his tube. So in educational fields, we talk about flow as well. There's a lot of literature relating to flow in terms of staying on task as we study and as we learn as well. And I find that fascinating because of the beautiful intersection overlap between the two fields. And I'm going to hand off to Angela in a minute, but I want you, as you listen to her begin to speak about flow and creativity, to notice some of the elements discussed here that are perfect overlaps to play work. Looking for things that may be painful or risky or difficult, but are still engaged in willingly and by choice, and whoever is participating is enjoying and engaging in that intentionally. Feeling that you're motivated and that you're motivated by the quality of the experience versus an outcome or an end, that process over product. Yet you're highly focused the entire time. So I'm going to hand off to Angela, who's going to be talking to us about the overlaps between play flow and creativity and what that means for gifted education.
So with, thank you, Selvin. Oh, are we on the next video? Did it start? There it goes.
Oh, well, sure.
Oh.
And so these are our fifth graders. You can see them engaging in many of the same materials. At the beginning, they had a really complex fort with multiple tarps and lots of bungee cords. And here's some there constructing. You can see kids working on new swings and just really making that fixed equipment come alive. And you can see by the complexity and the sturdiness of the things that they're constructing, the flow and the engagement is evident in those products that may not be the intended outcome. They're in it for the process, but you can see from what they've created how creative they're being and how well they've been focused. for extended periods of time, which is why I think this video clip is great. And again, those are fifth graders, those are 10 and 11-year-olds playing, which is awesome.
Thanks, Sylvan. And when Sylvan and I first met and started talking play and gifted and creativity, one of the intersections really was this concept of flow. And I'd never heard of it in terms of play, because I hadn't really done a lot of work in terms of play at all. I came to the play field later in life, and Sylvan is actually the one who really introduced me to a lot of it. And but I knew about play from that last slide. So I'm going to flip back there for 1 second, and that is from Mahai Csikszentmihalyi's work, and that is on creativity. So that is where I had known this concept of flow and the idea of creativity. And this is this state of being in which, athletes might call it the zone, or this idea of being so focused or hyper focused that you don't even know what time it is anymore. And so this is something that a lot of scientists or eminent workers in any kind of field or domain would experience and talk about, this idea of they're so wrapped up in what they're doing, time passes, they don't notice hunger, they don't notice anything, because they're so focused on this idea of whatever is in front of them. And again, when you look into creativity research and work in this domain, people who are eminent in their fields will describe their work not as work, but as play. And I think that is what is particularly noteworthy about creativity and play, is where we continually see these intersections. And I'm having really hard time figuring out how to make the screen big again. I don't know, Sylvan, if you know how. I kept trying and it kept messing with your slides, and so I stopped trying. Because I'm trying to look at pressing this and it says exit full screen, so I don't know if I want to do that. But when we look at creativity and we look at creativity research, one of the things we can think about, and this is sort of almost, I think, opposite of what we would think about to do in play, is how we boost or increase or teach creativity. Because in play, we think about it as very natural, as very student-led. And in creativity, when we think about creativity, we think about the concept of, are you born as creative as you can ever be, or do you have the potential to increase your creativity? Do you have the potential to be more creative or develop your creativity? And there is a lot of work that researchers, including Csikszentmihalyi, who I mentioned on the previous slide, do in terms of, yes, you can certainly increase your creativity and boost your innovative thinking. And part of it goes with some of these words that I have on this slide here. And so part of it is in terms of, how do you increase some of these novel ideas, capturing your ideas, always having with you a kind of ability to record, either a notebook or a voice recorder. Our phones help us a lot in, in this measure, because that is always something that we have with us. The next is really seeking out things. And here I think there's really this cross with play, is just always having things to seek out challenging tasks, seek out projects that don't have a solution, things to do, things to try, and things to explore. Broadening your knowledge is a big one, in terms of just exploring things that you don't know and looking into different ideas that you would like to learn about, and exploring concepts that you are not the expert in. And this is a key thing for adults, not just for children, because this is where we learn to play and be creative and continue with this as adults, because it's important for us to stay and continue on our creative development as adults as well. And then we also want to continue with surrounding, that is not what I meant to do. I apologize. Surrounding ourselves with creative people and creative ideas. And that is a big piece of it as well. In terms of boosting innovative thinking, those are the last few, and that is getting sleep. Ideally is the best. Now, there's not one right or wrong amount of sleep for any one person. It does depend, but getting the right amount of sleep for your body. Collaboration really is key, and that's one thing that we see a lot in play. Though there is certainly the instance of one person having that initial goal or having that one thing that he or she wants to do. The idea of collaboration amongst people and being able to have a leader, have the developing of leadership skills, learning, especially in play, learning from people that are older than you or learning from people that are younger than you is important in nature. One of the things Csikszentmihalyi writes a lot about is surrounding yourself by nature is a really important piece of finding creativity and finding a creative spark. And then being happy is a piece of creativity as well. All right, and I am going to take a second. I apologize, but I am going to try and exit. No, that didn't work. Still trying to figure out how to make this go back to full screen so you guys don't have to pay attention to all of my stuff at the top, but I can't quite figure it out. I apologize. I don't know why it's not going back full screen after we did the video, so I can at least try and make it bigger, if that helps. Here we go. So creativity, is it a process or a product? And this is a big debate, and this is something that I think that we see a little bit in play, and I think play hopefully is about the process. Play is about what we do. But I think where we have turned play and where it becomes dramatically unplay is when we turn it into a product. And by this, I mean how we have overscheduled students or children, and how it's no longer a pickup game where we've created our own rules for a game of stickball or baseball. It's now Little League and turning, 10-year-olds into almost pro athletes in national games on television. And so I think we've turned what play could be or is or should be perhaps even into a product by scheduling and creating these formalized structures of play. And creativity can be the same way, and we take what could be this idea of creativity is really a process, and we push and we push and we push until we take the creativity out of it to make it into a product. So creativity, a lot of times we talk about in terms of big C creativity and little c creativity, and that is the picture you see over here, the big C and the little c. And that is the idea of having big C creativity, which is that breakthrough thinking, that those inventions, those big pieces of art, those monumental creative works that really transcend the way we think about the world. And then little c creativity are those small ideas, the ahas, the things that really enhance and enrich our lives. That's creating a new recipe. That's, I ran out of one ingredient when I made banana bread today. And so I substituted with half milk that I made into buttermilk using some vinegar and half cream cheese because I didn't have sour cream. It's little things that really enhance our lives or enhance what we're doing that show creativity and show creative thinking and are little accomplishments that sometimes we don't even think about as accomplishments. And so when we go through this creative process, it's generally seen as 4 different steps. And that is the preparation or the work that we go through, the thinking process. Then there's the incubation, and that we go through and that's where we kind of sit on it. Sometimes we forget about it. And that's sort of this mystical step of just thinking and stewing about it. And then there's the illumination, and that's the aha or the eureka moment, or the really now, is that how we do it? And then there's the implementation, which is where we're putting it all together and making it work and going through the process. And sometimes that's a period of that flow, which Sylvan and I have both touched on a little bit, and then frustration, and then flow again. And so all of this creativity work gets together with giftedness. Why giftedness? Well, because that's my field. First of all, as I am a scholar in giftedness, in looking at that field, but because a lot of times in creative work, it is tied heavily to the field of gifted and talented instruction. There's a lot of debate about that, about why creativity should only be tied to giftedness, or why it is in the realm of giftedness and not in other realms or in all realms. And that's certainly agreeable to be in all realms, in my opinion. But it is very strongly placed in gifted education in a lot of different ways. And one of those ways is in the three-ring conception of giftedness, which you see on your screen now. And that is one conception of giftedness that is brought on by, or is discussed by Dr. Joseph Renzulli. He's currently at the University of Connecticut and has been for quite some time. And the sites that you see here are as recent as 2005, but this is as well long back as 1977 when this was first published. And that's the idea, first, that there's no such thing necessarily as identifying a gifted child, but that you're looking for gifted behaviors. And then where these gifted behaviors are developed or seen are when you have above average ability, creativity, and task commitment. And when those three things overlap, you can see in the drawing, my pointer, is this intersection of gifted behavior. And so the idea is that a child has some above average ability, some creativity, and some task commitment. And when those three things are put together, the child exhibits gifted behavior in that particular domain, in whatever that domain was that those three things are being exhibited. And so in many ways, creativity falls within the domain of giftedness. Dr. Renzulli's is one conception of giftedness. There are definitely more than one conceptions of giftedness that incorporate creativity. This is one in which it is a significant piece. Dr. Jane Piertos also has a significant role. Creativity has a significant role in her conception of giftedness. And then there are some others, such as Dr. Gagne's framework. And then others have a smaller role in which creativity takes part. And then other ideas of giftedness, creativity might not be as much of a piece at all, because theirs might focus more on cognitive ability without as much focus on creativity. So it really depends on the conception of giftedness, how much creativity is a part. But most conceptions and frameworks of gifted education do have a focus on creativity. And just as a quick explanation, this idea of task commitment, a lot of people use it as motivation. It's not quite motivation, because it's really focused on a specific domain or specific area and dedication to do a specific task, or to do a specific activity, or to find out a specific question. So it's not that I'm always motivated to do work per se, but they're focused to find out an answer. So it may not look like the typical work that a teacher or an administrator may think of when they think of motivation. It doesn't necessarily mean that they always do their homework, which I think is what comes to mind when a teacher sometimes, or an administrator thinks motivation, it doesn't mean that they always pay attention in class. So it's not motivation like that. It's not teacher pleaser motivation necessarily. It means that they are very focused and driven to understand a particular concept, idea, or solve a problem. So it's not generalized motivation, it's specific to an idea, a question, or a task. And
Okay.
so, oh, go ahead.
I was taken over too quick, sorry. So this connects, you may, if you have a great memory and we're paying attention at the beginning, this is not a quiz, but you may have heard me say that my role is school-wide enrichment teacher, and you're probably seeing that connection now to what Angela was just talking about. My school does implement the school-wide enrichment model. And so this was a wonderful intersection to take a very quick diversion. I was educated as an elementary school teacher. I spent 10 years in the elementary school classroom. I shifted gears. I worked in play-based, child-directed early childhood for several years when I really needed a break, and did a lot of study in the field of play, in the field of play work. I learned a lot about self-directed, authentic learning, which had always spoken to me, but I had always been sort of immersed in these public school settings. And so when I returned to the elementary school classroom, I was armed with a lot more language and theory and pedagogy than I had been previously to really back up these things that I kind of inherently understood in my gut. And if you're attending this conference, you're probably one of those people too, that I just felt that we learn when we're innately, inherently motivated. And so Angela just spoke to the difference between the kinds of motivation and task commitment that you sometimes hear people talking about in schools, which isn't real motivation, it's obedience or doing what I told you to do, versus true gifted behaviors, true task commitment that's being focused and driven to do something innovative and new, something, and being focused on a task because it's interesting to you. One of the things I always think of, and if you're not a North Carolina native, this may not be familiar to you, so Google when you're done, Wallace Simpson, the whirligig man. He's a great example of, do you know Wallace Simpson?
Uh-huh.
Or really any other folk artist. I think folk artists are great for this. People who exhibit gifted behaviors and may or may not have actually been phenomenal students in school. People that do wild, outside the box, innovative things. But the whirligig man, and please Google him, created these amazing structures that are pieces of art, feats of physics and engineering. And by all accounts, he was a mechanic. He was a great mechanic, which is certainly a talent in and of itself, and speaks to his intelligence. But he was not considered any kind of scholar or anything like that. He was an amazing folk artist. And it was in that those kinds of contributions to society that happen outside of any kind of school structured framework. There's no school of study for making whirligigs. As a kind of gifted behavior, the kind of really outside the box genius, creative, productive giftedness is what Renzulli calls it, that I think intersects so beautifully with play work. And so we do implement the school-wide enrichment model at our school. That can look different from place to place. To me, what that model that Angela just explained to us means is that giftedness, a person isn't necessarily a gifted person at all times. And giftedness certainly is not dependent solely upon IQ tests. It's when we have that intersection between areas where we do have above average ability. Notice that doesn't say exceptional ability. It can be exceptional ability, but it can just be, well, above average, because when you combine that with intense creativity and intense task commitment, your own innate, intrinsically motivated task commitment, then you see gifted behaviors. And it's a more equitable gifted program than you may see in some places, because it's not dependent entirely upon kids' test scores. It's about what kids are doing and producing, and it's a model that intends to empower kids to be intrinsically motivated, to be innovative, and to create. And so there's 3 types of investigations or activities, and I'm going to let Angela talk about that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we implement that at my school with some examples.
So SAM, or school-wide enrichment model, has type 1, type 2, and 3 activities. Type 1 are general exploratory activities, and the idea there is that they are things that are offered to every child in the school. And one of the things that Joe Renzulli says is a rising tide lifts all ships. And so these type 1 activities are offered to every child, and they are things that either speakers are brought in or field trips where students go out, but it's enrichment activities that are offered to everybody. Type 2 methodological training or how-to activities are specific kinds of training or activities where students learn specific skills. So these may be research skills, they may be understanding a specific content, and these are going to be more focused. So these may be skills that all students might learn, or they may be skills that only some students might learn, again, dependent on those gifted behaviors, and again, dependent on the needs of the children. So type 2 are really specifically targeted to who might need to learn them and why they might need to learn them. If a student isn't going to write a 5-page research paper, they may not be needing a little bit of training in how to write a 5-page research paper. So that one is really dependent. But if it's general research skills in terms of how to use a card catalog in the library, do they still have card catalogs in the library? That's a good question. So how to use the computer lookup system in the library, you know, that's something that they'll all get at the library, and, you know, by the library media specialist. And so it really depends in terms of these type 2 activities, whether or not all students or some students get them, just depending on what the type 2 training is and what the purpose is. Type 3 do tend to be more specific to what's called the talent pool, or the group of students that is identified within the talent pool. And because these are independent or small group investigations, and those are activities that the students have a question that they want to solve. And so these are activities most of the time, ideally, that the student has developed a question and wants to come up with the answer for. So when we think about that middle ground for those gifted behaviors are arising, the student has an interest, they're demonstrating creativity, they're demonstrating above average potential, and they're demonstrating task commitment in a specific area. And they're saying, okay, I have this question, you know, we went on this field trip, I really want to know those answers. So they get some type 2 training in how to figure out the answer, and then they go on this explorative project in order to figure out the answer to this question they have. And that is that type 3. And so these can be run in a lot of different ways, but that is what the idea of a type 3 is. It's an independent or even a small group that is trying to figure out, it can be led by a teacher or coached by a teacher ideally, but it should be student run. And the idea is that they are learning something of interest to them. So student led, of choice, of something that they are wanting to learn more about, and because that task commitment piece, that they are driven to find the answer. And I think Sylvan has a story on the next slide about something that occurred.
Oh, I think I do. Okay, so advance here to the next slide. So like I said, this is a model that we implement at my school, and it fits nicely with my philosophies on multiple levels. So what you're looking at here is what you think it is. It's a bird skull with some kind of bedraggled feathers on top of that great dark mulch that you have in landscaping at schools. It didn't look like this to begin with. To begin with, it looked like a bare bird skull with a big fluffy pile of feathers until it rained. So I had a group of students, and this was not our primary focus. We're walking from our main building. Our campus has several different buildings for pre-K through 8 and separate buildings. I had a group of elementary school students heading to the middle school building to work in the greenhouse there. And they noticed this pile of feathers, and they wanted to look at it. And you know, there's a lot of like, ooh, don't touch that, because they wanted to touch the fluffy feathers. But we investigated it, and we thought, this is an interesting mystery. And I had some 4th graders who were already studying animal adaptations in their regular classroom science classes, and I thought it might be cool in enrichment to do some owl pellet dissection anyway. So I thought, well, you know, we've got this crime scene right here. We should investigate it. So by happenstance, nature brought me this crime scene, and we decided to investigate it. So we roped it off, and the fourth graders would go out there. Whenever they saw me during the week, I cycle through it, I see all the classes, and you can see here students' methods for organizing their clues and their suspects and what they thought happened. You can see in the notes maybe that there was a puncture on top of the skull. They were analyzing what type of bird they thought that it might be. This required a lot of research. And you can see here, if you're thinking about that diagram that Angela just explained to you, how type 1, type 2, and type 3 on some level appear to be a hierarchy, kind of increasing in complexity, but it's also a cycle. So you start with the type 1. Everybody could have seen this. All the fourth graders were exposed to it. And then as they all began asking questions, they dug deeper into the type 2, learning the different skills you might need to be, well, a crime scene detective or just a good researcher. So we had field guides and other informational books. We pulled up websites and dug into what kind of songbird. We thought it was probably a mockingbird based on the feathers. Again, unfortunately, it rained on them, so that made it more challenging. And then looking into what kinds of animals prey on mockingbirds. You can see this child here has owl, crow, hawk. Kids were thinking maybe snakes, maybe cats. And we investigated what bird of prey pellets look like. We dissected those. We found that was very different than the remains that we'd found. We did some digging into birds that maybe hit a window and then fall. And really the kids eventually had to pitch their case as though they were a lawyer, either trying to defend or prosecute different animals. During this time, as part of another project, I was fortunate enough to be hooked up with a wildlife camera that also had night vision. And so we put that up outside a middle school building pretty close to where these remains were found. And so the kids were involved in that whole process. They had to figure out exactly where to place it to be in keeping with the instructions from the company that let us borrow it. So there they are getting prepared to set up the wildlife camera, which was intended to just see what kinds of wildlife visited the campus. But lo and behold, what we caught was multiple nights in a row over Christmas break, a feral cat coming in very, very early in the morning. It was still dark, which seemed really vindicating to the kids who had been saying that a cat killed the bird. We'll never know, of course, but this is a real authentic problem the kids chose to take on solving. And it was so cool to watch the work that they put into researching and figuring this out, and then defending their case based on this real life problem that appeared on our campus. And you can see that cycle where some kids did take it into really a type 3. They were empowered by their own thinking, and it became real student-led learning. And they took on different skills throughout the type 2 aspects of that process. But it all began as a type 1, something that everybody was exposed to. And for me, there are a lot of clear intersections between that kind of play flow. The kids were always willingly engaging whatever aspects of it that they were working on. And that looked very different from kid to kid, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. The cat at the end, that gets me every time. Thank you, Sylvan. And so we're going to move on to what some of the research is in terms of this connection between gifted children and play. So what is the research? And actually, it's pretty limited in terms of a search, especially when you try to limit your search to the last, if you limit to the last 10 years, it's incredibly limited. If you limit to the last 20, you get a little bit more. And the main research that we have out there is that it's about stress relief. And that, there was a 2000 study that found that gifted children are particularly susceptible to stress, and that begins in elementary school, and that they can be just as overwhelmed as adults are by stress. And that the answer to this potentially could be that the students in the program, the gifted program, should have recreational downtime. And basically the idea of these kids need to play. And so that was the one study. And then there was another study. This one is a little bit older, in 1998. That first one was Nichols and Baum. And in 1998, Olenchak had a study that was pretty similar, again, just stressing the need for gifted students to have time to relax, play with friends, and experience downtime that's unstructured. And so those were earlier studies. The most recent study was the fifth and sixth grade students. And this was a really interesting study because it actually talked to students, which is nice. My theory is generally you want to know what students think, you ask the students. And so I really liked reading this study, and this was focus groups of students in fifth and sixth grade. And it was also really an interesting study because they looked at students that were in an urban, a suburban, and a rural school district. And so they were asked to, sorry, I hope you can't hear my dog too much. They were asked to describe the value of play in cognitive, physical, and social domains. And so they were just asked in these focus groups to really think about what play is in a lot of different ways. And so they talked about play in terms of learning and socializing in the general classroom and in the gifted program. So they differentiated between the two and outside their classroom. So they talked about the necessity of play, and they said they think kids need to play. That's not too much of a shocker. They saw play as renewal. They thought it was an opportunity to relax and return to focus. So kids themselves saw the importance of play during the day as an opportunity to renew and get back on track. And then they also saw it as motivating, and that afterwards that they were more able to focus on learning and retain what they were learning, so that having the break and having the ability to play gave them the opportunity or gave them more ability to then later focus on their learning. The children said that they were able to see how play itself developed teamwork and problem-solving skills. So they recognized that play had that potential. And then they thought that play helped them learn in terms of it offered structured learning and experiential learning. And they thought that it provided meaningful activities in the talented and gifted program, as well as in the general classroom. They also saw some barriers to play, and those were predominantly in two ways. And those were in structured activities. So the ways that we have planned for our students to be involved in different activities. So the soccer and the teams and the dedicated ways that we have already planned for them. And then the second was in homework, and the amount of time it took them to complete homework was detracting from their ability to play. Another bit of academic research is an article by Dr. Makeka Overstreet, and this is a very recent article. And she talks about how we need to infuse play within education at all levels. And she talks about how learning and play are not mutual exclusive entities, but that play is an integral part of learning and it should be protected, and that it does not in any way need to be exclusive to early childhood settings. And so her article is written in some ways from a literacy standpoint, but also is just a general call for attention to the need for play throughout all educational levels. And she really focuses on the ideas of critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, and creativity. And so earlier I talked a little bit about the idea of increasing creativity. And another way of thinking about creativity is the work of Guilford. And when we score things like the Torrance test of creative thinking, the way we go through this is through fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. And a shortcut way of thinking about this is many, varied, unique, and detailed things. A lot of people confuse many and varied or fluency and flexibility. And the difference there is fluency is just having the same thing, like having a lot of different answered. And flexibility is a matter of having things that are different from one another. Then originality is having things that are different from things that other people might say. And so, and then detail is adding on. But these are all different ways to have creativity and growing creativity. And so when we have competitions, things like Odyssey of the Mind, what the coaches do is they actually practice activities that are designed to have students practice these skills of fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. And they go through the point system of, okay, that would get you this many points, that would give you a separate number of points. And so that the students can practice thinking about, okay, so I know I want to come up with a lot of answers, but I also want to come up with an answer that is flexible, or I need to make sure I'm coming up with the answers that are original, so that the students are thinking about things in different ways and making sure they're not just coming up with the same answer over and over. And so it is a skill set that you can grow. And so in the end, the thought is really, how is all this overlapping? Where is gifted, play, creativity? Where is all this overlapping? So what you can see is just sort of some general ideas about gifted and play all on this one slide. And it's not everything that we've talked about in this presentation. There's not enough room for it on that slide. And there are a couple of extra things that aren't on this. But in general, a lot of the overlap comes from creativity. It comes from the ideas of choice. It comes from the idea of when we allow self-direction. And I'm going to pause for a moment, and because I'm giving you too many of the answers, so I'm going to pause for a moment and let you pause the screen on your end and let you take a moment to think about it. So hopefully you paused and took as much wait time and think time as you needed. But to go back, it was, so a lot of it, the overlap is in that creativity, is in that self-direction, is in the choice, is in the idea of when we think about play and looking at the engagement factor, in the idea of having something that Csikszentmihalyi talks a lot about, having immediate feedback. And that doesn't necessarily mean a teacher giving you feedback, but there's feedback embedded in the system. So he'll talk about a surgeon. Well, they get feedback because if all of a sudden the body cavity, sorry, this is very graphic, but if a body cavity is starting to flow in with blood, you're getting immediate feedback. And so if basketball, if you miss, you're getting immediate feedback, or whatever the system is. So there's some kind of immediate feedback. It may not be an outside source giving you immediate feedback, but there is that immediate feedback. And so there's a lot of different aspects that creativity, especially, and the idea of flow overlap in both gifted and in play, and especially considering they use the same word. But then the idea of a structure, but the structure of which, or the rules of which, are not necessarily dictated by an outside source, but created from within. Again, that's very much so overlapping within creativity, play, and a lot of times within how we work in terms of the gifted field as well. But there's a lot of overlap between how we think of play, how we think of gifted, and how we think of creativity. What we do want to caution, though, is what Sylvan said earlier in terms of there is a difference, of course, between play and gifted instruction and creativity. And gifted instruction by itself is not necessarily synonymous with play, and we don't want to we don't want, while there is a lot of overlap, we don't want to say they're necessarily the same thing, because we want free play to be free play, and we want to draw the line between the two. But we do want to call attention to the overlap and to the fact that there are quite a few connections between the two, and to really highlight those connections and take advantage of the connections that do exist. Right. So this is To one video and one story, I went to visit Sylvan at her school, and this is what I saw. This, by the way, is Sylvan. These are her students begging her to take a turn.
So these are third graders who had constructed this pulley system. It's full of like mulch and leaves and things. And they're really excited for me to see how it works and to explain all of the planning that went into it and how to use it properly. They want to make sure I didn't mess up their contraption, and it works really smoothly. I'm sad that you can't hear them explaining it because they're just such knowledgeable scientists explaining their pulley system.
But I love this. I went to see Sylvan and I went to hang out at her playground for loose play parts. And to me, this was the example, right, of how play and academics and giftedness all overlap. Is they're choosing to take their academics and put it to work. This is not the academics being forced upon them on the playground. They are building simple machines and using simple machines terminology on their own on the playground, which I was just amazingly floored. I thought it was fantastic. And because the connection was there, and that's what's so important, giving these materials, yes, it's on the playground, but they are taking of their own volition all of this academic material and they're infusing their play because that's what's learning, right? They're learning and they're learning through play. And so it doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be, we need to make academics more play. We have to make anything. We're presenting them the concepts and they're going to put it into play because that's what play is. Play is practice of the real world. And so so it wasn't just them playing with it and not using the terminology. They chose to use the terminology. And then this next one, oh, this is not Sylvan's class. But it was fifth grade, Sylvan?
Yeah, so a group of fifth graders, one of our fifth grade teachers is just really into the Iditarod. And so for years and years and years, she's built some really amazing integrated units of study around the Iditarod and reading materials related to that. And she integrates it into science, and the kids get really pumped about it. Like I know you spend a lot of time in schools, and you see when a teacher is actually really passionate about something, it just connects with the kids. And so the kids were already really connected with the Iditarod. They had been reading about it. They've been talking about it. I had heard them talking about it in some of my classes. I've been doing some work with Native peoples, First Americans, and they're making some real connections with the people in the Arctic, and they knew a lot about their traditional dress. So they've been talking about it a lot. So they asked me to get out some of the big bins, those big sturdy plastic bins that I keep a lot of these parts materials in sheds on the playground. And I was kind of skeptical because there's kids sliding in them down the slides, which was cool, but too dangerous when you have a lot of concrete on your playground. They said, we want to make sleds, dog sleds. And so they were hitching themselves to like some kids in the big bin, and then other kids basically harnessing themselves as though they're sled dogs and shouting, it's the Iditarod, I'm a musher. Like they all have mushers that they followed, and so they're telling us like their mushers' names and the names of the dogs, and we should watch them kind of play with the physics of, as you probably saw in the videos, it's a really urban campus. And our playground is concrete and astroturf, which is not ideal in any way, but it was really interesting to watch them figure out the physics of being able to have a kid-powered, non-wheeled mode of transportation moving on one of those surfaces. It moves on astroturf, not on the concrete at all. And like you have to have a lighter kid in there, and some kids need multiple kids. But yeah, they played Iditarod, these fifth graders, and to hear them talk quite knowledgeably about the Iditarod race and using the terminology that they'd clearly been learning in class while being such playful kids, which I hope as I'm recording, my own fifth grader doesn't hear me talking about it, but like, they can be kind of like, I'm too grown up for this, or, too cool for things. But to see them both enjoying school and enjoying play and those two things intersecting was really awesome to see. And I'm glad that you got to see that. I'm sorry we don't have any footage of that because it was a really amazing experience.
Yes, it was very cool. But we wanted to share the story, which is why we have these adorable doggies in the Iditarod race. So we talked about a lot about why play. And so when play, start with recess, of course. I know that can be challenging with schools. We've had a couple of We Play chats about recess, brain breaks, transitions, creativity, but really giving them that time is essential. When you're ready to move it into the classroom, thinking about things like makerspace, but that's sort of like loose play parts, but creating something in a way, but just sort of putting it into classroom ideas. And then on the next slide, we have, oh, no, that's not it. Sorry. We have bigger ideas. And these are a couple. So Global School Day has already happened this year, but it's February 5th every year. And so there's some links about some different kinds of activities that are really just broader, bigger ideas. And it's really just the idea of putting together materials and tools and opportunities and other children, and then just really just giving them the freedom. And so however you're able to put that together, and so you can screenshot or whatever some of these resources. But on this previous slide, I know a lot of you come to the Play Conference because you know Peter Gray's work, but this is his story in terms of how he got interested in the play field, and his son and the school in terms of the Sudbury School. And so that slide really just talks about that. And really these are just some of the resources that we have in terms of that. But really, if you have any questions, we'd love for you to contact us. I don't know, Sylvan, if you have any closing thoughts as I put up our last slide there, with our contact information with the wrong title of the presentation. Sorry about that.
My closing thoughts really are that I hear a lot that either it's impossible to incorporate real play, real empowerment of students into public schools. We kind of have this notion of the traditional kind of drudgery, like Pink Floyd, another brick in the wall institution. And school doesn't have to be that way. I'm here to say that I'm at a public school that really is not that way. Yes, it's school, and there are compromises that I make. And I really do welcome anyone watching this right now who is a teacher or a parent or in any way affiliated with public schools to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you and to refer you to other people who can talk to this knowledgeably. And you have to be prepared for some compromise, but it's worth it. I'm here to tell you that it can be done, and that it matters. It's valuable, it's meaningful to the kids and to the parents. I hold many roles, I wear many hats in the school. I am the school enrichment teacher. I'm also the magnet coordinator. So I'm a teacher, I'm kind of an administrator. I do a lot of things. I work with kids in a lot of capacities. Many of those things are appreciated, but when I run into parents out and about, when they hear that I'm Mrs. Taylor that does Play Day Fridays, that's all they want to talk about. That some people say that that's the only thing that their kid really opens up and talks to them about when they get home. And our school's a pretty great school. There's other good stuff going on. But it matters to families, and I'd love, 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 love to connect with anybody who wants to talk about that. So that's my closing thought. Contact me, please.
Yes. Thank you so much for tuning in and attending the online US Play Coalition Conference 2020.
Thank you.